Hello, hello, hello. Hello, Facebookers. It's another Sunday. I said I would try to do this every Sunday. Topics may change, topics may look different, topics may be based on how I feel, what's going on in the world, what I'm experiencing. Not certain beforehand, usually, what I'm going to talk about. But today, like last Sunday, things were anniversaries. I've mentioned in the past that May is a hard month of past experiences. And so last week marked the anniversary of, it would have been, forgive me, I can't think. It would have been 15 years since I had an abortion. So that was the anniversary, which is why I touched base on that briefly, I think, last week. Today marks 19-year anniversary of the passing of my father. And so it's bittersweet in ways that makes me reflect because for those that know me, know that I'm a writer, know that I write poetry. Book 6 that I've worked on now for over a year is entitled Dismantling Daddy Dysfunctions and All the Men I Loved After Him. And of course, it pays homage to my father. And so working on that and being able to have that conversation about my dad and share that with the world, it allowed me to reflect because the book was supposed to come out on May 21st, which although it's not the day he passed, May 21st holds significance for me because that is the day that I buried him, laid him to rest, if you will. And you'll get more backdrop to that statement that I just made as you hear more about dismantling daddy dysfunctions. But the day I laid him to rest is also the day I graduated from high school. So if you can imagine. So May holds a lot of conversation for me. I call it my month of Mays. Sometimes it comes with that bittersweet, that depression, that whatever. And depression, not in a medical treatment, but like in the blues as grief comes in cycles. And so today is also my father's sister's birthday. So my dad did pass on his sister's birthday. And just a backdrop to what that looks like for me 19 years ago. So May 12th would have been, I believe, the last day of school. May 13th, no, May 11th would have been the last day of school. I think May 12th was prom. May 13th was Mother's Day. And so Thursday, May 17th, I was already out of school. We were preparing for graduation. I had gone up to the hospital to see my dad and tell him about, the expectation that I had for myself, getting ready to graduate and all these different emotions. Because as a senior in high school, you want it to be the best time of your life. It's like a rite of passage. You're walking across the stage. You're getting ready to transition from under your parents' wing into your own realm of discovery. And so I had went to the hospital that Thursday morning. My dad seemed to be in pretty upbeat spirits. And we were having conversations. My older sister, who is not my dad's daughter, is my mom's child, she had come up to the hospital. My aunt, which is one of my dad's sisters, but not the one who shares the birthday with his passing, she was there, and my grandmother, his mother, came up. But I was there first by myself, and I'm usually there always, at least the 2 years that he was in and out of the hospital and then hospice. I was there by myself. I would spend a lot of time with him. Sometimes I'd spend the night. And I became more of like his caretaker in the last days of his life, in the last year and a half of his life specifically. And so it was standard. It was natural. It's like, I'm going to see my dad and hang out with him. He might paint a toy car, put a model car together, or he was into writing songs and things of that nature. And so I don't remember if that day was particularly hard for him, and if it was, he didn't express it. But I remember my cousin, my first cousin on my dad's side was needing to be picked up from college, the college that I would end up going to in the fall. And so her sister had come up to the hospital as well, also my first cousin. And basically, we were given the instructions that me and her were going to go get her sister from school and bring her back to Omaha, which is like a 30-minute drive into Blair, Nebraska. And so I remember the emotions attached to that day when that decision was made, because I felt like the decision was made without my input. And I didn't want to leave the hospital. I came up there, it was my day off from work. I was already out of school, so I had all this free time, which I didn't really call it free time because my free time was invested in spending it with my father. Hey, cousin. And so I remember being angry, but I could see the resolve, if you will, and I didn't really know it at the time, but I could see the pleading look that my father had, leave, go with your cousin and get your cousin because you are here all the time look. Kind of like that, now of all times you want to pick the perfect time to try to be somebody's dad. Okay, that would be the perfect time to do it. So begrudgingly, hey Mia, begrudgingly, I went with my cousin Rachel to go pick up her sister Erin. And I want to say we had called Erin and said we were on our way. And I was angry because I was like, I don't want to go get her. I don't want to drive 30 minutes to Blair and then have to grab her stuff and put it in the car and bring it back. But I did it. I did it out of obedience. I did it in hindsight for protection. I did it because I knew that the look in his eyes was specific to me. He needed me to go. He needed me to step out of the room so he could have room to do what he needed to do in that moment. And I said I wasn't going to cry, so I'm not going to go there. But when we got back to Omaha, I want to say we dropped my cousin Erin off because at the time, which hindsight is so amazing because now she's into this type of arena dealing with death and the experience of, but she didn't want to go up to the hospital to see him. Mind you, he was in hospice care. And so my cousin Rachel and I went back up to the hospital, and I remember getting up on the 7th floor, which was the cancer floor, and my sister was in the window looking out, I assume waiting for us to return. And she was like, here they come. Like I could hear her saying these things clear as day. And I hadn't even gotten to the door yet, but I knew when she said that he was gone. And so I think there was a room off to my right before I'd even gotten to the hospital door to his actual room. And I had went in there and it was like a little seating area. And I just said, I don't remember what I said, but I know there were some tears involved. My cousin was crying. I was crying. My sister came out. And I want to say she was like, I'm sorry, or something she said. And the memory is faint because now he's been deceased longer than I had him alive. So memories, I replay them because they're the only memories I have. And so follow along with me as I tell you this story, because this is kind of where I plot and plan for hopefully a future book tour when this book does come out. And so I remember going into the room and it was somber. And at this point, I think it was afternoon. So it was probably closer to 1 or 2, if I remember correctly. But I'm going to be honest, it could have been 11 or 12. But time kind of stood, it was at a standstill. And so I remember seeing him. I don't know if I even hugged him or said bye or kissed him or anything. I don't even remember that. I remember going into like a conference room and we were talking about, the discharge of some in terms of paperwork and charges and, kind of like the removal of the body to the morgue and things of that nature, and what funeral home was going to take place, and the yada yada yada. So I'm still fresh off of high school, so these aren't really conversations that they're asking me to help make, which that's fine too, because I didn't necessarily have the space or breadth or depth or understanding to make those decisions anyway. I was 18 years old. And so my father passed on the day that is supposed to be his sister's brightest day, her birthday. And so she remembers that 19 years later. So she'll always bring that up. I miss him. I can't, he died on my birthday. And so that was May 17th, 2001. So fast forward 4 days later to May 21st, 2001. And in the process of those 4 days, my grandparents were paying for his plot. My grandparents were paying for the funeral. My grandparents were paying for everything because of his lifestyle choices and the things that he did with his life, which will all be unpacked in Dismantling Daddy Dysfunctions. So don't think I'm going to ever leave you guys with cliff notes or leave you hanging. And hopefully in these weekly conversations, we can unpack some of that. But in the middle of 17th to the 21st, we were planning, putting together his obituary, getting the program and services together. I was writing a poem to eulogize my father, but I was also preparing to graduate. So I had family coming in town who were supposed to be celebrating, this quote unquote rite of passage. And all I'm thinking of is this the poem that will do my father justice before we lay him to rest. And so I remember getting up and at this point it's a Monday. So Monday, May 21st, 2001. I remember getting up, getting ready, getting dressed. What do you wear to a funeral? For this occasion, it was black. So picking out something to wear, and, people had been calling all week and having conversations with me or about me or to me or for me, as we mourn the loss of my father. Now, side note, my father was my baby, so trust and believe you would get fault behind him even to this day, 19 years later. So don't come for him. I will, little pieces. Growing, give me room. But so a lot of times when people would call during this time, I would be like, I'm not listening to you because you had nothing nice to say about my father. I was one of those children. You had nothing nice to say about my father. You didn't like him. You had comments that were, well, why is Essie's son this, that, or the other? Because Essie is my grandmother, my dad's mother. And so, although I could hear people say, I'm sorry for your loss, or I know what you're going through, some of the worst words to ever use when someone loses someone, you do not know what they're going through. You can empathize with what they're going through, but you have no idea what they're going through. Unless you've asked them, and even still, you don't. That's a snippet. You have a snippet of understanding, but not an actual real life lived understanding. And so that morning, I got a ride over to my grandmother's house. My parents were not married, so my mother necessarily wasn't invested in all that experience, although she was there for me. So I think my uncle had picked me up, my great uncle picked me up, took me over to my grandmother's house so I could ride in the procession limos with my family over to the church. Now, mind you, I live closer to the church than I do to my grandmother's house. So it was like going past the place I needed to return back home in the evening. Whatever. And so I got to my grandmother's. Everyone was getting ready. We got ready, got in the cars. They drove us to the church, got out. And I remember everyone lining up like 2 by 2 or in groups of 3 so that we could procession in as a family. So I had my older sister on one side and my younger sister on the other side. And this is another thing about funerals that I find absolutely hilarious. The folks who act a fool. The folks who do all the wailing and the hollering and the hooping, and I ain't gonna tell y'all who was doing all that, but that was present in my procession down the aisle into the church as we were getting ready to honor my father's life and pay our respects, our final respects. And so that morning, the program was a blur. I got up, I did my poem. Not a dry eye in the house, lots of laughs. I talked about how he made burnt popcorn and how he would try to barter you for services. So he'd do anything you wanted him to do: fix your car, fix a leak, cut your grass. But you would have to give him something like money for cigarettes, money for a 40, whatever it was. You had to, the bartering had to work out for him. And so I, put all that stuff into the poem, because even though he lived a quote unquote hard knock life, he was still mine. And everything about him, those intimate details of his life, they were mine. They were memories that I got to adopt because somebody needed to tell his story. And so I gave this poem to eulogize my old man, and hopefully in hopes that I would be able to do him justice. And after the service, we went to the cemetery, put him in the dirt, came back, had a meal, probably with some fried chicken, because that's just what we do, or that's what we did. And then I think I took a plant home. Because somebody was like, do you want any of these flowers, or do you want any? And I was like, no, not really. I mean, I'm not really invested in taking care of plants or flowers. And they were like, well, this one you don't really have to do a whole lot for. So I took a plant home. Don't even know how long it took before I killed it, but I did do that. And then I went home, took off this black dress, these black pantyhose, these black shoes, and started unmasking that grief, that frustration, and put on a new outfit, because I was burying someone in the morning, and then I was walking across the stage in the evening. 7 p.m., Civic Auditorium, people were going to show up for me and watch me walk across the stage. Now, that year, that high school experience, I don't remember who the valedictorian was. I don't remember what the speech was. I don't remember what Principal Bernice Narrett said. I don't remember any of that. I don't remember who sat on my left. I don't remember who sat on my right. I don't remember what friends I hugged, because I was still coming off of this cloud of, I just laid my father to rest. So graduation wasn't important to me. It didn't matter. I didn't care. I didn't want to be there. Only reason why I was there is because people were coming in from out of town, and I felt like it was the right thing to do. Didn't know until after graduation was over that my grandparents were even there, because you get so many tickets, you can buy a few extra. And so I was just passing out tickets to people who wanted to go. And so after graduation, I remember it very clear. I remember this deep down guttural scream that I let out. Everybody's screaming anyway, so it's the perfect time. But I let out this gut-wrenching scream because I was done. The day I was done with it, I was done with people telling me, are you okay? Like, no. Why would I be okay? Why would anything about that moment be okay? And it's okay to not be okay. But I think when we deal with people's uncomfortability, when we deal with people's grief, when we deal with people's pain and frustration, it's hard not to understand they're not okay. And letting them be silent or still or comfortable in not being okay until they can process, until they can deal with, what it looks like to finally be okay. So after graduation, hugged on, loved on, talked to, and then headed back home. We had a cake, some snacks, some food, whatever, and people came over, but even that's a blur. Like, I can remember my cake had some blue on it. I mean, because my school colors were blue and gold. And I remember there was something that said congratulations on it. And so saying all that to say is that was the setup. That was the foundation, because there were conversations that were had in that moment that happened subsequently to my graduation. A pastor had said, you'll forget this day. It'll be a distant memory in your life. Now, mind you, we had a conversation after that, years later to be exact, about how that made me feel. And he rectified what he was saying by saying he didn't mean it in that manner, and gave me an example of someone else close to him who had something catastrophic happened on her birthday. So as to not cloud the situation with the bad experience. But the reality is, May 21st will always be the day I buried my father. But it's also the day I graduated from high school. And look at God, it's also the day I graduated from college. So May 21st, 2001, buried my father, graduated. May 21st, 2005, graduated from college. So it is always going to be in my remembrance. And it's in my remembrance for a reason. Because again, I'm saying this is foundation. This is what would allow me to birth this book, Dismantling Daddy Dysfunctions. And I've said it before, whether via a post or even on a live, the story of what that looks like for me has now occurred over 19 years. And so I said it's very easy for you to bury someone, but not actually lay them to rest. I'm going to say that one more time. It is very easy for you to bury someone because you're not actually doing the burying. Someone else is putting them in the dirt. Someone else has already put them in the coffin. Someone else is already making sure that they're putting the dirt on him and then repatching, or her repatching the grass. But it is up to you to lay that person to rest. That is a choice. That is a decision. That is a giving up, if you will, a surrendering of. You can hold on to their memories, their spirit, their lessons that they've imparted, but you've got to be willing to lay them to rest. So therein lies the beginning of this journey that I would embark on, because although I buried Vernon Jefferson on May 21st, 2001, I didn't choose to lay him to rest until I finalized this book. So I started writing Dismantling Daddy Dysfunctions in 2017. So I carried the skeleton. Now, some of y'all, this is going to not catch up to you until later in life. Some of y'all aren't going to understand this until you face the things that are dysfunctional in your life. But I carried the skeleton of my deceased father for 16 years before I owned that I hadn't grieved properly and that I didn't find resolution in that relationship. Because a lot of times we're waiting for the forgiveness that'll never come, the apology that'll never come, the answers that'll never come, because a dead man can't give me those things. And so you have to be willing to go within yourself and unpack what you can actually control and surrender what you can't. And so here I am, dealing with grief on my own. I didn't go through counseling. I didn't have a therapist. I went through school. I thrived in school. I didn't actually hit the fan until I had moved away to seminary, and then everything just fell apart. That's a conversation for another life. But we'll come back to that in a future life. And so 2017, I started writing these poems about my relationship with my father. Now, mind you, when he died, I had wrote a letter and I wrote a poem, and I chose to do the poem at the funeral, but I think the letter might have ended up in the obituary. And the actual poem was in my first book called Naked in 2008. And so those things started reflecting some things that I had to deal with, some things I needed to check. And of course, I've always been the strong one. So my sisters were emotionally distraught at the funeral, and they took over that realm of emotion. And I was just showing up for their need. And so you'll hear me say a lot, check on your strong friends, or everyone needs a friend until it's time to be one. And that gleans from that experience, because sometimes we have to understand that he who refreshes also needs to be refreshed. And it doesn't mean that you have to come up with pretty words. It doesn't mean that you have to come up with a thoughtful experience. Sometimes you just need to be there, and you need to fill in the gap, and you need to stand there in need with them, or stand there, just stand there, be there. Presence is more than enough for some people. And so sometimes I reflect on that and I say, I just needed someone to be there. Now, there were people there, but they were there in a capacity where they were assigned tasks or responsibilities. I needed someone to be there for me. I don't think anyone really understood the 2.5 years of that experience as a child, watching your father walk through the final days of his life. Not especially when he wasn't present growing up, or when he was present, he was possibly high or getting ready to steal something so he could sell it for drugs, or even just do the things that his addictions allowed him to do, the demons that he was fighting. And so I knew for myself that there were conversations that I was going to have with people. And so coming back to that conversation with the gentleman who said I'd forget it, like I said, we did have a conversation about that because that was necessary for my grief cycle, for my healing, for my process, for my understanding, and for him to understand where I was and where I'm at in that moment where we had that conversation. Because sometimes you will have to return to the things that haunt you, especially if you haven't dealt with them. And so then I also had to have a conversation with my grandparents, because yes, I was 18 and no, I didn't pay for the funeral, but I felt like if someone would have just asked me how I felt before, surprise, we're going to bury your dad on the day you graduate high school. Now, I know keeping some corpse in a fridge for a certain amount of time may cost you more, but even just asking the question, how would you feel if we did it on this day? Or, because then you may have heard, well, you do realize that's the day I'm graduating high school. And I felt like there was no inclusion in that conversation. And not that I was necessarily owed that, because like I said, I didn't pay for anything. But the conversation surrounding that could have benefited me from not carrying anger and hostility, and even just grief for even the relationship with my grandparents, because it felt like they didn't consider me. And so having a conversation with my grandparents years later, now mind you, I said this last week, my abortion recovery group was kind of the catapult for all of those conversations, because when you're dealing with one thing, you have to come back to everything else unchecked. So, childhood traumas of sexual abuse, or relationships that were violent or divorce. And I'm just giving you examples, not necessarily experiences, but we will be very transparent over this next year, because dismantling daddy dysfunctions is not just for me, it's for everybody. And so having those conversations about what caused me pain and how I processed the pain, and owning the responsibility of my own emotion, even at a young age, not taking into consideration the things I couldn't control, because I couldn't control what my grandparents decided on, but I could control how I reacted to it, and then subsequently how our relationship was affected by that. And so I gave my eye view, if you will, as a young person, what it felt like to be me in that moment. And so they were able to understand where I was coming from. I wasn't disrespectful. I was mindful that they are burying their child. I was like, so yes, he's come from you, but you also have to understand that I buried my father and I came from him. And so they had, I think when he died, he was 47. So they had 47 years of his life in memory, in pain, in joy, in whatever those things were attached to those memories. I only had 18. And so I wanted them to understand it from that perspective, because when my father and mother went their separate ways when I was maybe like 9 or 10, for good at least, I didn't have any active, visual, tangible things to relate back to my father. I didn't own pictures of him. We didn't have pictures together. We took pictures together, but he had those all in his property and possession. So when he died, none of those things existed. I don't know if his family situation, they got lost, they got thrown away, they got destroyed because he had a whole nother family. And no, he was never married. And yes, there was a child born out of this family. And so I had my theories, if you will, because some of the things were so big and so vast that if you did throw them away or destroy them, you would remember and saying, oh, I've never seen that in my life, and I know it was in your house before, because those kind of things I do have a crystal clear memory of problems with, but that's neither here nor there. And so painting this picture for my grandparents, because I wanted them to understand where I was and what I was experiencing in that moment, and leading up to his death, I was there almost every single day. So I felt like something should have been said to me. A conversation should have been taken into consideration about my feelings. And so we had the conversation. We were able to heal ourselves whole from that, so that at least we could do repair work or light work in our relationship so that we can move on from that. And then I will say that there have been beautiful conversations that have since come out of that I've had, sitting with my grandfather while he's peeling apples, and he's talking about how he misses his buddy, talking about my dad and how smart he was. And he was smart. He was a genius. He was intelligent, highly. But he made a lot of bad life decisions. And those decisions, based on his addiction, affected so many people, including his children. And so being able to share those memories with my father's father, and being able to share those memories with my father's mother, my grandparents respectively, who are still alive, had been therapeutic, had been helpful, had been beautiful for me. And I did take notes today, so I promise I won't do a whole lot of rambling, but I'm trying to lead up to my 3 points. And so that happened. Other subsequent conversations and basically transparency moments needed to take place. A lot of times we say, I attract the wrong type of man now moving into relationships, because the book is Dismantling Daddy Dysfunctions and All the Men I Loved After Him, because of course he's the man that I first loved. And so looking back over my track record of dating and mating, not cohabitating because I didn't do that, but dating and mating, because I'm not a virgin either. Subsequent conversation last week about an abortion. But having to look back and reflect over decisions I've made, or people I've been attracted to, or people who have been attracted to me, although I could say I am the common denominator, because I am, there are a lot of things that if you don't unpack, if you don't address, if you don't actually have an actualization of, or an awareness to, you will miss, and you will keep repeating it. So my father was an emotionally unavailable man. That was his first trauma, trigger, dysfunction in my relationship with him. I liked, attracted, or attached myself to emotionally unavailable men. Yes, I blinked on purpose, because the reality is that if you don't figure it out, you will never fix it. And if you don't stand in the uncomfortability, the muck and the mire of that reality, you're bound to repeat those instances. And so I looked over time, I plotted, I placed people down into my remembrance, and there aren't many, but they all carry some of the same traits. They're emotionally unavailable men. I don't necessarily want a project, but I think I was attracted to projects because my father became a project. Now, my father became a project in the later years of my life with him because he had cancer and he needed somebody to do simple things like help him drink water and help him get stuff that he at some point was physically capable to do. And so I think that carried into what I was going to do as an adult because one, if you don't have the examples in place, and I'm not saying that, I wasn't blessed and fortunate because I have survived and thrived and I live a good, full, abundant life, but if we aren't doing the light work in our relationships with our parents, and then we go into relationships with other people with those things unchecked, we are going to do ourselves a grave disservice and we're going to do other people no good because we're not healed. We're not whole. We're not functional. We're not aware. We're not together, if you will, because we haven't put those pieces together, which is why DDD was birthed. And so looking over those relationships of past experiences, I could recognize that there was something dysfunctional about a person, but I would overlook it in the hopes that they would change, that they would do better, that they would grow, that they would develop, because a lot of times we don't fall in love with the person, we fall in love with their potential. A lot of times we don't fall in love with a person, we fall in love with their potential. Or we fall in love with the project. Because a lot of us like to do projects. A lot of us, our gift is project manager in everybody else's lives but our own. How about that? And so I had to start unpacking that conversation with myself so that I could have those honest reflections about what am I doing? What am I saying? How am I presenting? Because I get the same question. Well, why are you single? Or you're attractive, or you have X, Y, and Z going for yourself. And yeah, I would agree with all those things. But you're a project. And I am attracted because light doesn't just attract light. Light also attracts darkness. And so knowing that sometimes what you're attracted to is not necessarily what you need, you have to use that spirit of discernment, that wisdom, that courage, that audaciousness to walk away from things that aren't serving purpose in your life. And sometimes when you have not checked the things that you are masking, you can't recognize that those things aren't serving you good purpose. And so you let them pretend to be things that they really aren't. And then you get sucked into more further trauma and dysfunction and crazy because you haven't checked the things that had you bound in the first place. And so, dismantling daddy dysfunctions and a breakdown. Of course, dismantling means to break into or to take into pieces, to pull apart. So here I am trying to, once I started working on this book, I'm trying to pull apart my father, dismantling daddy. So I'm trying to pull apart my father, the things that he was, his isms, his idiosyncrasies, his flaws, his perfections, or things that he did well, his calls that left me unsettled, his calls that went straight to voicemail when he had promised to show up and didn't, so I'm trying to pull apart these things as I'm carrying this corpse around. So you can imagine a child who carries around a security blanket or a stuffed animal. So I'm figuratively carrying around a dead man because this is my security blanket, y'all. And so I had to start unpacking. I had to start releasing because I should own the fan club, the rights, the merchandise to love. I believe in it. I think it's healing. I think it's restorative. I want that for everyone. I want that for myself. So I believe in doing the work. But sometimes we sell things without actually applying it to ourselves. And so I had to come back to this conversation about my dad and the grief process and the forgiveness process because all those things were necessary for me to move on. And not only just to move on, but to move forward. Accepting that I'm whole, that I am healed, that I am worthy and deserving of love, that I have the capacity and the forethought to give it back out. Because I never had that problem. My father taught great lessons about how to love someone even where they were at, because he wasn't the best human being ever. But I loved him. And I loved him in spite of what he was doing. I loved him in spite of what he did to my mother. I loved him in spite of what he did to himself. I loved him in spite of what he did to me. And it wasn't a blind love, because I was very much aware once I came to an age of understanding. But it was a love that was selfless, because I knew that he had nothing to give me but his heart. And there were fragmented pieces. So, if you're a broken person, you're more likely to cut up another person and break them. And if neither one of you do the light work, you're going to keep breaking other people. And sometimes breaking your own self. And so back to breaking down DDD. So dismantling means to take to pieces, to pull apart. Daddy, of course, means one's father. So I'm taking apart my father, the man who I told y'all I'd fight y'all over if y'all talk bad about him. But there are things that I had to be able to say out loud. My father was a thief. My father created volatile situations that ended up with him with bullets in his body, bleeding out in our tub at my house when we lived at 3350 Boyd Street. These are things that I remember as a child. My father addiction fell out into my lap as I saw him with white powder on my dining room table at 3350 Boyd Street when I was a child. Or I saw him in my mother's car get out and go to a corner and pick up what looked like some type of package before he'd take me to the candy store, because ain't nothing greater than having $1 and being able to get 100 pieces of candy. But all those things had to be unpacked, because as a child, you may not have known these things were going on, but then it started coming crystal clear as you became into an age of understanding. And you were like, is that what that was doing? Was that what I saw? Oh my word. And so as I'm taking to pieces, pulling apart my father, I am remembering the beauty. I am remembering the pain. I'm remembering the joy. I'm remembering the frustrations. I'm remembering the hurt. And then things creep in. Why was his addiction more important to me? Was I not good enough? And so as children, and at that point now I'm an adult child, because I am still healing the child in me, to understand, and mind you, no therapist. I didn't go to therapy. Doing the light work can be done on your own. You may still need to go see a therapist eventually, and I will. Shout outs to Black Health Matters, because it does. But you can do the light work in the right safe space, in the right environment, and the right prayer of understanding, because God can take you out of anything that you're experiencing for your healing and restoration, for your good and for his glory. And so after I pulling apart my father, I'm pulling apart why? Because there's an abnormality, an impairment to our relationship. It wasn't all roses without thorns. It wasn't all peaches and cream. It wasn't all, Saturday cartoons and no homework. There were true, legit problems. There were true, legit concerns. There were true, legit breakdowns of relationships. My mother loved my father. And there was a love that, of course, it's going to surpass all understanding for me, because I was like, love must be really blind in some aspects. But my mother loved my father, a deep, immense love. But at some point, she loved herself more. She loved her children more. And she walked out of that relationship because it was necessary. Because her love for herself had to override her love for her father, so that the love that she gave her children wasn't tainted with the pain that lingered in the love that she had with my father. And so I had to look at the things that impaired love so that I could heal love. And love isn't just something you say. Love is something that you are, and love is something that you show. So love is a noun and a verb. It's not just a filler word. And so as my mom did her light work, and she never went back to my father, and I thank her for that. There were things in that relationship that I even had to unpack with how my mother dealt with my father, which will be in the companion, marrying mommy, because I don't have children, but I do know that in that work, you have to be very cautious and very careful with a child's mind and how you speak of their other parent, because a lot of things can happen in that precious understanding of their childhood and how they view their parents. Of course, children will come to an understanding of who their parents really are. I mean, children aren't completely oblivious. And things will come to reality and to light, but give them room to discover that on their own. And of course, I came to an understanding. Of course, it was also tainted with, I hate him, or I don't like him, or things like that. And not just from my mother, from people in my father's family, because he was considered a black sheep, if you will, because of his addictions. And like my cousin said, addiction does hurt everyone who loves you. It absolutely does, but it hurts people in different ways. Because some people pick up the very addictions that you have. Some people become addicted to who you were or who they wanted you to be, and they start marrying that in relationships. Me. And so I'm trying to take apart this father of mine so that I can look at the impairments and the abnormalities of my relationship, so that I can try to find some wholeness, some healing, some restoration. And I said this to a friend a couple of days ago. Sometimes we're restored not to that relationship, but to ourselves. And if you're into higher beings and a God of your own universe, or God, for me, I'm a believer. So I'm restored to that relationship and seeing him in the light of the word Father. And so having to move around that conversation by doing, again, and I always reference light work because it becomes light work. You're going to have to shine the light on the dark places so that you can do the work. Emotionally, physically, you're taking yourself pretty much on a spiritual journey, because a relationship invested two spirits together. I'm a product of my father. So of course I've inherited some of the things that he was. Good, bad, or in between. And so as I'm dismantling these daddy dysfunctions, I'm also owning my own ish, because now I'm an adult. So I'm at an age of majority where I have to be able to say, hey, I have to be responsible. I have to own this. I have to be accountable to this, because I can't afford to go around cutting people, because that's not fair. That's a disservice. So I hate the phrase hurt people, because in my opinion, hurt people choose to hurt people. Now, they may be doing it with other things into play, addictions, depressions, and things of that nature, but it is still a choice, whether they've made it to their own inclination and understanding, or they made it just on autopilot because of they're in an addiction or whatever. But all of those things still streamline from choices that you've made. So hurting people choose to hurt people. So I made a declaration to myself that if nothing else, I was going to own my stuff so I could present who I was, which is why I say representative, you will never get from Shannon Ford-Jefferson. You will get a true, honest inspection and reflection of who I am, who I was, and who I aim to be. And I own my ish. Even if it ain't pretty, I accept the responsibilities even when I'm at fault. And sometimes I overthink because I've had to do that work. And some people have not done the work, so they don't know that you're being like 100% legit. They don't know what to expect from you when you say, I am who I say I am. And so I made it my mission to let love live. regardless of how it looked when I was a child, regardless of how it looked the day my father kicked me out of his hospital room, regardless of how it looked the day I was supposed to be happy and graduate from high school and I had to bury my father, regardless of how it looked when I went through a relationship that resulted in a pregnancy that ended up with me choosing to have an abortion, I decided to still let love live, because that too is a choice. Love lives inside of me, so I need to continue to let it manifest. I need to continue to let it overflow. I need to continue to show it, to be it, to do it, and give it away, because out of the abundance of my heart, my mouth should speak, right? So my mouth should be able to speak love to those, even when they're less than lovable. My actions should show that there's some love there even when I'm frustrated. You can love someone and still be upset. You can love someone and still disagree. You can love someone and still have a conversation about how they wronged you. And that's where I started growing in my light work, because I wanted to go into future relationships with the understanding that I'm not the only one that has trauma or dysfunctions from their daddy. I'm not the only one that may have had some things that mirrored from my mother. And so I didn't have these titles until later, but this is where this conversation started forming. It started shaping in my early 20s. And so I'm looking at these relationships. I'm looking at my relationship with my parents. I'm looking at my relationship with my siblings. I'm looking at my relationships in my environment in which I grew up in. And you have to start unpacking that, pulling it apart, which means you have to start pulling you apart. Because if you don't let yourself be healed, you're going to cut up people. You're going to cut up yourself. And it is very well okay that where you were hurt, you can find healing. People say, oh, you can't get healed from a place that hurt you. Of course you can. Have you ever got a whooping and your mama kissed your boo-boo? Because my mother has been able to be both the source of my affliction, if you will, because whoopings felt like I was being afflicted with some serious and also the person who hugged me and consoled me and said, I love you, even though I just had to discipline you, because don't we discipline out of our love for one another, unless of course it's abuse, a whole nother story. And so you can very much find healing in the places where you've been hurt. So I had to go back to the places where I had been hurt. I had to go back to the people who hurt me. And I had to unpack these 3 things. And so the 3 things that I feel like I needed to know so that I could grow from these things is 1, forgiveness is for you. Forgiveness is not for the other person. Forgiveness is for you because in essence, you're holding on to things that harmed you, that hurt you, that hindered you, or held you back. You're holding on to them with these ironclad fists. But while you're holding on to those very things that hurt, harm, hindered, or held you back, you aren't open to receiving the things that are meant to do you good. So you have to forgive, not for the other person, because they may never apologize. My father died. I didn't get an apology. You have to forgive so that you can move forward, so that you can move on, so that you can mingle in things that are meant to bring beauty into your life, beauty for ashes, because that pain, it will leave you prone to for furthering more pain. If you don't accept that this is where I'm at and this is where I want to be, you're not going to be able to walk that way. It's an awareness. And so doing that self-awareness and understanding who forgiveness is for frees you. It's a freedom. It's basically taking the shackles off your hands, releasing your fist and saying, I'm open to receive. I didn't know that these things were going to happen to me. I didn't ask to be born into a dysfunctional relationship, but I'm here anyway. Now what am I going to do? How am I going to respond to other people? How am I going to love in those dark places where someone is not the best that they could be? Because again, I said earlier, we don't fall in love with people per se. We fall in love with their potential. or who we want them to be. Look over your life, look over your past relationships. We fall in love with people's potential. And that's just real. A lot of times we don't actually get to learn the person until we've said I do to them. Or we spend enough time observing them. Now, yes, I know I probably should have been a counselor, but I'm here doing my light work, and whatever you want to attach to my name, yes, I'm that. And so forgiveness is for you. You have to be willing to do the light work. And it's okay to have somebody come along the side of your journey and be your accountability partner or be someone that you can talk to. But you also might need to get a journal. Excuse me. Teddy, stop whining. Y'all, my dog is a brat. Say hi to the people. He want to go out there. I'm at work. And so you might want to, if you don't have someone to do the accountability work with, because you may not have an accountability partner. I didn't have someone that I felt like was accountable to what I was experiencing, could help me unpack, because most of my friends still have both of their parents. So you'll never truly understand what that's like until you lose someone in that capacity. And so a lot of times my solace, my journaling, my refuge became my poetry. And so you have to be willing to do that light work, but also you have to be open to pouring back into yourself, because once you started removing those dark places, those hurtful places, you have to want to pour back into yourself with things that are good, with things that are whole, with things that are filling, with things that are reminding you that you are worthy. You are worthy to be loved. Even though my father had addictions, it didn't mean he didn't love me. It just means that he was clouded by things that held him bound because he had demons attached to him. His drug addiction was his security blanket. His skeleton was mine. And so once you know those things about yourself and you know those things about the people in your life, you can start pouring back into yourself. You can start pouring back into yourself with the truth of light and love and longevity, so that you aren't bound to all of those things, because they will hinder you. They will kill you. They will starve future relationships and endeavors, because they needed to happen. But we need it to happen to ourselves. We need to be able to refresh ourselves. We need to be able to heal ourselves. Now, don't get me wrong. Everybody is not going to have it put together. You're not going to be arrived in every relationship that's going to be forever. Some people will have to do the light work in their relationships. But if at all possible, if you are aware now and you are single and you are not committed to someone and you can do the work now, start doing the work now. And I just said this to a friend who's grieving the loss of a loved one. Don't be me. Don't carry the skeleton of that person for 16, 17, 18 years, because you've missed possibilities of opportunity for 16, 17, or 18 years. Who knows what I could have done if I had done the light work 6, 7, 8, 16, 17, or 18 years ago. And here I am celebrating, remembering, honoring, and paying homage to a man who's been deceased now for 19 years. So do the light work. Go see a therapist if you need to. Talk to an accountability partner if you need to. Reflect on years and months of journal writing if you need to, but do the work. Pour back into yourself. Find good people who will pour into you, not those who will say, "Oh, you'll get over it. You. I understand. I am." I don't want you to empathize. I just need you to be there in the moment of the experience so that I can go through it. So that you can encourage me and say, "You got this," or "It's okay to not be okay right now. What do you need?" Do the light work. Pour into yourself. Find good people who will pour into you. And this is the best part. This is the meat and the potatoes after you've done all that. Be sure you continually remove the fluff. Anything that serves you no earthly good, because things will come back into your life that will remind you of what you did prior to the light work, and that comfortability that you had when you were in that is easy to creep back in if you aren't aware. So we tend to date people that remind us of things that we experienced that aren't good, or we go down alleys and roads of temptation because it sounds good, it felt good, it looked good when we were experiencing that prior to the light work. But once you've been removed from those dark places, don't return to them. So you'll see me posting memes about you need to be unavailable to things that mean you no earthly good, that drain you, that are not for you, that are toxic, that are negative, that create dead cycles, that doesn't sit well with you, that doesn't value you, that doesn't love you. And I said this a few years back. We have to be real with the fact that even down to the core of it, what's unavailable to you includes change or lack thereof of change behavior, and that may be you. You might be the toxic person. You might be the negativity, which means you might have to turn right back around and start at the beginning and do the light work. We are not an evolved ED people. We are an evolving ING people. The goal is to continually evolve because we have not arrived, ED. We're arriving. We're getting there. We're becoming. Shout outs to Michelle Obama. We haven't become. We haven't became. We're becoming. So you have to continually do the work. You have to, you don't just start a diet, lose a weight and stop. You're continuing to work out those healthy lifestyle changes on a continual basis. And when you fall off, you pick back up. That's doing the light work. That has to be in every facet of your life, including your love language, including your relationships, including the redemptive, restorative work of all those things. Because I want to restore love. I want to be love. So I had to do the work to see what that looks like. Being kind when I don't feel like it. That's a part of love. Understanding that long suffering is a fruit of the spirit. Like those conversations I had to be able to have and unpack with myself about things that I was doing in relationships or even just in situations with people when I'm just dating, and the rules of engagement because of things that I had gone back to after I had done the light work. Don't get complacent in what used to make you comfortable. We aren't trying to be comfortable. We are trying to grow. And sometimes we know that growing comes with pain. But it doesn't mean that the reward isn't worth it. So remove the fluff. That includes an internal fluff. Taking out those negative self-talks that you have with yourself. Reminding yourself that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Reminding yourself that the plans for your life are to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future. Reminding yourself, speaking truth into yourself, speaking light, because that manifested word gives you a reality, because our power is in our tongue. And so you have to be able to do the light work, have the conversations. And sometimes those conversations don't feel good, but they're for your good. You have to own it. I always at work when I'm training someone, I always talk about your 3 things of your advocacy for yourself are ownership, responsibility, and accountability. You need to own the things that you know about yourself, the flaws, the things you do well, the challenges, the hang-up, the hiccups, the successes. But you also need to have responsibility for how you maneuver through life, not just for yourself, but with other people. We're not an island, so we engage people, and we have to be responsible for how we treat other people by how we treat ourselves, because we treat people based on the extension of how we treat ourselves. You can't pour from an empty cup. Nobody wants to drink fumes anyway. And then you have to have an accountability to that. Are you who you say you are? Are you doing what you say you're doing? Because eventually I'm going to know you by your fruit. Excuse me. So if you say you're doing the light work, but I see you always depressive, dismissive, disgusting in your behavior for yourself and other people, you aren't doing light work. I don't know. You're doing work, but it ain't light. And so you have to have those real rich, and I say rich because there's value in unpacking the dysfunctions and dismantling them, whether it's with yourself, with your parents, with your spouse, because a lot of us are in dead relationships. And dead relationships can be brought back to life if you do the work. Now, a relationship is two people. So, of course, with dismantling daddy's dysfunctions for me, I can't do the work with my father. He's deceased. But I can do the work for myself so that when I prepare to enter into a relationship with another human being, to love, to have, to hold forever, I won't be carrying the skeleton of my father around, because the person that I'm intended to spend the rest of my life with doesn't deserve that behavior. That's not what love is, and that is not what love does. And so I had to be willing to invest in my now so that when my future shows up, we can show out together. But we're still evolving. So you're going to have pains. You're going to have growth. You're going to have moments of clarity where you're going to have to continually unpack. Get you some people in your life who you can unpack with. Get you some conversations that you can have that invest in your total self, in your whole self, in your healed self. Create safe spaces for each other to dismantle the dysfunctions in our lives. People aren't weak because they've experienced trauma. They are weak because they don't have people to help them unpack the things that have traumatized them. Or they don't have people present to believe the things that they've experienced, or just to say, I hear you. And I love you. And I support you. And in this moment, anything you need, if I am able to give it, even if it's just being there, allow me to be there. And so we have to get around this conversation, especially around my brothers and sisters. We have to be able to have this conversation with each other, because we don't have a lot of conversations about our trauma. We don't have a lot of conversations about seeing therapists. We don't have a lot of conversations about what broke us, what destroyed our families, the secrets that we kept, sexual, child abuse, domestic violence, addictions, the pedophile in the family, all those conversations that we just want to seemingly sweep under the rug because what happens in the house stays in the house. If you leave things in the closet, they will fester. They will create a whole ball of confusion that seemingly you will put other things on top of, and you will wonder what the stink is. You will wonder what the stench is. You will wonder why you can't stay in a relationship. You will wonder why people don't want to be bothered with you. You will wonder why you running from job to job and from city to city and from, dysfunction to dysfunction, because you have not checked the things that have harmed, hindered, or held you back. And they're still holding you back because you are not aware that they exist in the first place, or you are so conditioned to not addressing things because what happens in the house stays in the house, or we don't share our family secrets, or we don't talk about what goes on. And I come from a Baptist background, so just think, people who don't want you to go in front of the church, not that that's my philosophy, because it's not, but if we don't address the things that hurt us, we will never find ways to heal us. So please, if I impart nothing else for you guys tonight, and I didn't mean to keep y'all this long, like I said, I am at work, but I felt like this was a conversation I needed to have today as I honor Vernon Bernard Jefferson's life. He would have been 67 this December, and I have been memorializing him longer than I had life with him. And so today, on the anniversary of his passing, the week that I thought DDD would come out, but pandemic COVID-19 happened. But that's great, because his 20th anniversary is next year, and if the Lord says the same and my publishing press is ready to go, we will be producing Dismantling Daddy Dysfunctions on May 21st, 2021. And so I want to be able to have those honest and candid conversations like I'm doing right now on this live. I want to be able to sit in rooms with people and help them do the light work, because we need to be a nation that heals, not a nation with holes, HOLES. We need to be a nation that's whole, WHOLE. And so I start with myself, because I think that's where transformative work begins. It all starts with me. And so I want to implore you all to look over your life, reevaluate things that you may be stuck in right now, and say why. If this is not the foundation, find out what the foundation of that hurt is and start doing the work. And then pour back into yourself, and then continually remove the fluff of things that are not serving good purpose in your life. It's okay to not be okay, but don't stay there. It's okay to realize that you are giving out more than you are receiving, but don't stay there. And if you are the common denominator in your toxic life, in your negative life, do the work in you before you try to get into something with someone else, because they deserve a whole person. They deserve a healed person. They deserve a person who's cognizant and ready for love. And the only way they're going to get that is if you actually wear love, if you put love into yourself, which means you got to do the light work, pour it back into yourself, and then remove anything that's not love itself. And so, thank you for sitting with me, for having a moment to hear a transparent work. This is what Dismantling Daddy Dysfunctions is all about. And like I said, there will be a counterpart mirroring Mommy. And that'll come out in August 14th of 2021, which is my mom's birthday. And so, love those who you're with. Love yourself hard and fiercely and wholly. That is my prayer for each person that listens to this live, whether on the live or comes back on the live. If you're in relationships now, confront those things that have held you back, individually and collectively, so that when you go into your life's journey together, marriage or otherwise, you have a whole concept of what that looks like, opposed to holes in the concept, and then you can't construct good things from it. Be okay with vocalizing where you are, and be okay with people not meeting your needs where you are, because sometimes people aren't going to be able to do anything for you in that moment, and you may have to do the work for yourself. Know again that I love y'all, that I will be back next Sunday, which is May 24th. I'll probably get back to talking about not another hashtag, but I will try to do every other Sunday or once a month at least some daddy dysfunction tidbits. So I may not revisit this section, but may tell another story about my dad and some 3 lessons that would come from that. Because like I said, that is what I plan to do if I take this on a book tour, is have those type of conversations. If you have questions, you know where to find me. Facebook, if you have my phone number, you can also get in my inbox. We can do more light work on dismantling dysfunctions. But no, I love y'all. Know I'm thinking about y'all. Know that you are not in this alone. Hug those that you love, and love those that are in your life and who love you back. But again, 3 things that you need to know so you can grow. Forgiveness is for you. Pour back into yourself and remove the fluff. And to my father, Vernon Bernard Jefferson, I hope that in this dismantling of you and the dysfunctions of our relationship, that love has the final word, that love leads the way, not just for me and my relationships, but for other people. My hope is that it gives other people permission to learn, to live, to love throughout all of that unpacking and all of that healing and light work. So y'all be blessed. I'll see y'all next Sunday. Enjoy your week, and take care of yourselves. Bye.